An African woman's story of divorce in Kenya. Read by Shibero, Akatsa. Chapter 3. The Whisper of Death. It was another beautiful sunny Tuesday morning soon after I'd made my decision. The big decision. I was so glad to be back in Kenya where I had my family, especially knowing that my father was a stone's throw away. That was comforting. You know, there's something heartbreaking about being unhappy in a foreign land where your family is not around and where you're not surrounded by familiar things. It just felt so much worse. After we had returned to Kenya, many a time whenever I couldn't cope with my unhappiness in the marriage, I'd fly to visit my parents in Western Kenya. Mind you, not that I would tell them what was happening. They never knew the state of my marriage because what they saw was a husband who loved me whenever we visited them. Nearly killed by my husband. On this particular day, I woke up determined to voice the big decision I'd made about our separation. I knew this was not going to be taken lightly, neither was it going to be easy. And as I'd guessed, there was total resistance to the decision of divorce from my husband. So I began the legal process anyway. There were many meetings with lawyers. It was after our last meeting with our lawyers that I decided to confront the issue of sabotaging the legal meetings, something my husband had gotten fond of doing. And this is how the fight broke out. There was a meeting to take place with the lawyers that week. It was to be on family finances. I asked my husband to bring the required documents like bank statements. We got into such a heated argument about the finance. They were his finances, he told me, and nothing whatsoever to do with me. This was followed by the threat that he would take our daughter away with him to the UK and I would be left alone in Kenya. Oh my goodness, this was the red cloth to the bowl. I saw red. Before me, my mind replayed the ongoing affairs through our marriage. And after my pregnancy, the verbal and emotional abuse, the lack of support from my in-laws, that's his parents, his family, the loneliness and isolation that I had been subjected to whilst we were living in the UK, and the ongoing abuse back in Kenya. Honestly, I saw flames. I saw flames of red soaring around me. I was furious with the abuse I had been subjected to. Before I knew it, my left hand moved like a flash of lightning. Wham! I don't know who was more shocked as I looked at my burning right hand. It was hot and tingling as it came back to rest by my side. In confusion, I realized that I had slapped him. Then everything became surreal as my life flashed before me. His folded fists began to rain blows onto my face, chest, breasts, whichever parts of my body they could find as I stood helpless in front of him. The blows kept coming like we were in a fighting ring. I kept moving backwards, trying to protect my body from the anger and fury that were giving the blows supernatural energy that finally toppled me over as I fell backwards into the flower bed that was filled with rocks in the car park. Suddenly, there was a heavy weight on me as the blows continued, hitting hard at my chest, my face, my head, and I screaming. Nobody came. After having been hit and couldn't be hit anymore, the hands turned to my throat. I felt his hands squeezing the life out of me. I was choking. It seemed to go on forever. I struggled, turning from side to side, trying to get his weight off me and get away from the hands that were bent on removing the life out of me. Finally, after struggling under his weight, I bit hard at his thigh and with all the strength I could muster, wriggled from under him and quickly stood up looking at him like a terrified animal that had just escaped from a lethal killing. I just stared at him. I remember thinking, this cannot be happening to me, as I continued to bleed profusely from the back of my head where I'd fallen and hit the stones in the flower bed. I saw my death flash before me. I'd be a statistic, like one of those Kenyan women who had been killed by their European husbands. Interestingly, most of the ones we'd heard were English. There had been such cases in the dailies. Thank God I'd managed to push him off me. I had almost been killed by my husband of 18 years. I knew then that there was no turning back. My body was numb and I went into shock. As my mind took over, I became like a robot. I calmly walked into the house, got my keys and came back into the parking. As I got into the driver's seat, the pain suddenly hit me. I couldn't sit. In agony, I silently began to cry. I was hurting all over. I had so many thoughts and emotions going through me. I kept thinking about our then 10-year-old daughter at school and how she had left me well in the morning. I contacted my family to let them know what had happened. As I was driven to the nearest hospital by our gardener, who was also a driver, I kept praying to God to keep me safe for our little girl. I had to live for her. I felt so ashamed that our marriage had reached such a sickening level of destruction. At the hospital, I was rushed into the emergency unit where I was quickly put into a wheelchair because I couldn't walk. I was then rushed into a hospital room where they gave me morphine to stop the pain, which was followed by the nurse cutting my hair, which was in locks at the time, at the back of my head, which had continued to bleed profusely from when I'd fallen on the stones. Then they stitched me up. Through all this, I cried silently as I thought of our daughter, whom I was to pick up after school. How was I going to juggle that in this state? I was put onto a stretcher and wheeled into the X-ray room. Everything continued to be surreal. After the X-rays, I was told that I had 3 broken ribs. They gave me medication and painkillers and told me to rest. How could I rest? At 3:00 in the afternoon, I told the medics that I had to leave to collect our daughter from school. Again, I'd become robotic. I wrapped my head in a scarf and went to the car, and I was driven by a driver to our daughter's school. When we got back home, our daughter noticed my bandaged head and the bruises on my face. Children are so innocent. She could see my pain and she kissed it better. That's what I'd done whenever she would fall down and hurt herself. It was extremely hard watching our daughter see her mama so hurt and crying. She put her little arms around me and told me how much she loved me. This is what I often did when she was hurt too. I burst into tears. It was too much. We should never have put her in this position where she sees her mama so beaten up and in such pain and full of tears. she carried on making it better for me in her little arms. Our marriage truly over. I didn't sleep that night. The following day, I was like a zombie. I was still traumatized and numb with disbelief and shock, and terribly saddened by the trauma I had been through. This is what domestic violence felt like? My whole body was aching. I couldn't stand up straight. I was bent over. And I had to look after myself and our little girl. I had walked with many women who endure domestic violence daily. Our daughter had never seen me so beaten and bandaged up, nor seen her mama hurting so badly that every step I took, I would crunch up my face in tremendous pain and silently cry. But I had to carry on and look after her, myself, and our home. I had spoken to very few people about the beating that had happened, and had been advised to report the battering to the police. I was still reeling in shock. That was my husband I was to report. How? The following day, with my blood-stained clothes, I made my way to the police station and reported the case. It took me 5 months after the beating that I felt ready to start the process of following things through in court. During those 5 months, I was tormented by the way in which we had fought. I would replay it over and over and over again. I had such a powerful mix of emotions. There was shame, anger, sadness, and defeat. And that is the end of the reading of chapter 3.